Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot podcast. Okay, so today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics of all time, and that is strategy. Love talking about strategy. And joining me to have that conversation is Katie Titus. She's the head of school at Moses Brown School in Providence, Rhode Island. And they've done some really interesting internal work around strategic planning, and I can't wait to dive into it. But before we do, of course, Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Peter. I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate the offer.
I'm excited to dig into this conversation, and we're going to get there in just a sec. But before we do, can you introduce yourself and Moses Brown?
Yeah. So I'm Katie Titus. I am currently the head of school at Moses Brown School, which is a pre-K through 12 Quaker school, Friends School in Providence, Rhode Island, serving about 760 students. And prior to being at Moses Brown, this is my third year at Moses Brown. And prior to being at Moses Brown, I did an interim head of school role at Lick Wilmerding High School out in San Francisco. And then prior to that, I was the head of school at Mercersburg Academy in Pennsylvania. So in my role as head of school, I've had the opportunity to do strategic planning twice, and I learned a lot the first time at Mercersburg around the process, and came into the work here at Moses Brown really excited about the opportunity to do that for this school as well.
So when you arrived, was that part of the plan out of the gate? Is like, we're going to dive into strategic planning. This is the right moment.
Yes, I mean, I think for a lot of schools, it probably was a moment of either strategic planning or looking at strategic plans because we were coming out of COVID.
Yeah.
And I arrived here in 2023. The school had finished its campaign and the strategic plan under the previous head of school, Matt Glendenning. And that was around 2020. And then COVID hit. And so they were in both leadership transition as well as in between plans. And that was one of the things that I frankly was kind of drawn toward, was just the moment in time for Moses Brown. And like you, I love strategy. So it was exciting to be able to come in at that moment. Now, we weren't exactly sure when would feel the right time with the community. And so we went into that first year, as most heads do, saying, I've got a lot of listening to do. I had a lot of learning to do around working at a Quaker school and working at a 3-division school. And the board gave me the flexibility to do some of that learning before we set a timeline around the actual planning for strategy.
Yeah. How did that help? I mean,
Mm.
so it's a new school structure, and you spend a year really getting to know it. Like, what were some of the things you took away from that?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, I tend to want to move quickly. That's definitely my natural state. So what was good about it, and especially for a Quaker school, was that it was just really important for me to dig into the culture and really make sure that I was meeting the people. And yet, it actually didn't take long for us to determine that we needed to begin to do some of the planning work. And I went to the board actually right before January, in that first year. And so that was the time we were going to talk about the time frame for launching the planning part of strategy. And I said, I think we're ready, and I think I've learned enough, and we know that the richness of strategic planning actually brings lots of voices to the table.
Yeah.
And so let's use the energy around a new head of school to begin that work. And we had a real dialogue about whether do we hire an outside consultant or do this internally. And I felt really good about, and this was before I understood the tools that were coming that might help us, but I felt very strongly about the strength of our leadership team and the board at the time. And we're a Quaker school. Like, people, we need to, there's an equality to the place. It's one of our core values. And I think people were going to respond better to let us all build this together versus having someone who doesn't really know the school come in and try to tell us what we should become in the future. So people seemed really energized around that approach, and it felt very right for Moses Brown. So we announced at our annual Stewarding Our School event in January of that year, 2024, that we were going to begin the process, and we launched from there.
Yeah, and so that's so interesting. So culturally, it was the right, lack of a better word, strategic move to do it internally. But right around that time when you decided, all of a sudden, a lot of AI was becoming more robust and more pervasive. And, whether you're on Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude or, whichever tool you happen to use, I you saw that there was an opportunity there to start experimenting with it. Like what led you to try it, and how did it all kind of play out?
Well, if I'm being honest, Peter, I didn't it wasn't strategic planning that led me to try it. I think
Mm,
I tend to be an early adopter of and really curious about things that are emerging.
yeah.
And I had the benefit of actually having one of our teachers in our middle school who had been he was well ahead of the curve. And he was actually finding ways to show it to kids and implement it into his curriculum. And so I learned a lot from him, and I was just amazed at the power of this as it was emerging. And so at that time, he was using ChatGPT, very limited basis, uh, to really challenge kids in new and different ways. And so it was we were saying, let's experiment a little bit with
Yeah.
this, and let's do it in a very controlled way. So that as we were launching our strategic planning process that spring, John Gold was working with his 8th grade using AI in the classroom, and I was those 2 things were kind of happening in parallel, but they weren't connected. But our spring sessions were all community sessions. We had 14 sessions that touched on about 700 different constituencies. Just asking people what are the core strengths of our school, what are our opportunities for improvement. And so, as you might imagine, with these strategic planning sessions, we had a lot of sticky notes
Yeah.
at the end of it. And then it reminded me in that moment, I was like, "Oh, that's why I hired a consultant the last time, because they took all those sticky notes and synthesized them for us and then came back to us with an understanding of the themes." And so that's really where AI came in.
So you were using AI to synthesize those and then uncover opportunities, themes. Like, what were you seeing on the other side?
It's just an amazingly powerful tool. So, there was a little bit of human effort because we were using pen and paper in the planning sessions.
Yeah.
But so once we digitized all of those sticky notes and all of the ideas that were merging from those community sessions, we were able to then sort of put that into AI and say, okay, help us. At the time, we had a goal to create the what we called the key queries.
Yeah.
What would be the foundation for the strategic plan, query being something very specific to Friends schools. And so AI helped us to do that. Now, the themes were amazing. Having a digital history of that work was amazing. The original queries that came out needed a lot of work, so I think it did a lovely job of helping to synthesize the themes, but you still needed the human element to say, well, that doesn't sound quite like Moses Brown. So then we took what AI was able to develop, and then we put the human element to it. And the leadership team really thought about what those key queries would be that we would take back to the community in the fall. And then we iterated again. We did the same thing over again around these 6 questions, and then used AI to help us synthesize that and develop the plan.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing here, and I think it's a really important point, is like you didn't go into an AI tool and say, write me a strategic plan.
No.
Like, no, like that's not what you did. But you did use it to do the synthesis work, which AI is just like brilliant at, right? It could take
Mhm,
all of this unstructured data and help you make
mhm.
sense of it, to then put your team in a position to have really thoughtful conversations. Because, like, I guess the question I was going to ask, and maybe I'm answering it right now, is,
Yeah,
Quaker schools are very human centric, right? Like, it's all about community, it's all about equal voice, and so it sounds like you were very intentional about using AI to enhance the process versus replacing that
that's
Quaker
correct.
process.
That's correct. And even then, I would say the tools were not even as robust as they are now.
Yeah.
And so, we were I think being very cautious
Mm.
that we wanted to make sure that this felt authentic and true. But I did have a moment when we did the unveiling of the vision and sort of the key pillars of the plan, where I had a parent come up to me afterwards, almost in tears, like, just emotional, and she had been very engaged in the process, and she said, it was so affirming because it was like you really did listen to us, because it all felt like it was reflected in the plan." And that to me was the most meaningful moment because, you really want good strategic planning processes are building community, right? And that it is and energy and momentum about the future of the school. And so it's important to get it right.
How did you go about the process of collecting the data? I mean, I know that you did multiple rounds of
Mhm.
collection, conversation. Students participated, right?
They did. They did.
Yeah.
Yes, in both sessions. So again, we rooted everything in our terminology that's true to Quaker schools. So I'll use some terminology that
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily, but I think every school has their own lingo, and this is basically our lingo. But the first round, which was in that first spring, were what we called "Let Your Life Speak" series, and that was an opportunity for people to share their personal experiences with the school. And we did that by constituency. So we did alumni groups, we did parent groups, and then we did student groups, and then faculty and staff groups. Um, and then after we created the key queries that we wanted to bring back to the community, we actually did what we call discernment dialogues. And that was very intentionally by design, multi-constituency. So we actually only did two of them. And so you can imagine sort of 300 people in a room all sitting around circular tables with these key queries, and they couldn't tackle all six, right? So we actually challenged them to think about one or two in their conversations, and we made sure that every table intentionally had representation from all the constituencies, and then our students were our facilitators.
Oh, that's cool. So were they taking the notes too?
So we wanted the students to be able to focus on facilitation. So we had one or two students at every table who were facilitating the conversation, and then we had a faculty or staff member who was going to be the recording clerk for the conversation. And so they were actually entering things we learned along the way, and of course the technology is amazing. They were entering things into at the time sort of a Google form so that we could compile it all together, and then show something at the end. And so we had a
Oh, that's
team of
cool.
people working behind the scenes so that at the end, rather than trying to go around to every table and ask for their report or their update, we were able to sort of flash on the screen some synthesis that AI helped us with behind the scenes. So everybody immediately got to see what was talked about across the room, which was a really cool moment.
I was gonna say, like, what was the reaction from participants?
Well, we were trying to do 2 things. One, we wanted them to genuinely have, like, a readout, across the room,
Yep.
but for many of them, they'd never seen AI work before, and so we were actually modeling the use of the instrument,
So
and
everybody knew that AI was behind the scenes doing
oh, yeah.
so you were very open and transparent. I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a cool moment, and so we had equal reactions to people who were talking about the actual content, and then the people who were actually just talking about the power of the AI tool. And then we just did an open session where people could share about their experience.
What an interesting modeling of the technology. Like, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but like, how is the school thinking about AI in general in terms
Mhm.
of student engagement and learning?
Yeah, we actually have a task force right now that is about AI generally, and then there's two subcommittees. One that's focused on sort of the academic side of AI and how our students and our faculty are working with it, and then how the staff are working with it.
Mhm.
And on the operational side with the staff, it's all about efficiencies.
Yeah.
How can we find efficiencies? It just feels as though there's just this increasing need to do more every year on the operational side of the school. And it's unsustainable for us to continue to just add human capital
Yeah.
to address those needs. So how can we actually use this tool to make our jobs a little more sustainable? So that's kind of what's happening on the staff side. And then on the academic side, there's certainly some faculty who have appropriate reservations around AI and
Sure.
are asking hard questions. And then really, it's how are we making sure that it remains a tool like every other technology we've ever introduced to schools,
Yeah.
and is not impacting the core of what we're trying to do, which is teaching this element of critical thinking for kids. So it should never replace that part of the work for students. And there's a nuance to that, and I think we're
Sure.
still figuring out the balance. But teachers are very explicit about when kids can and cannot use AI and why, and that I think is helping the kids to understand, how to use the tool most effectively. And so that's what we're seeing on the academic side. And then to strategic planning, Notebook LM out of Google. So we do everything inside Gemini because it's a protected source for us because we're a Google school. And Notebook LM has been that next iteration of transformation of the AI, because it allows us to put multiple documents, into, one source, and then ask it questions or continue to iterate on synthesis, which is saving massive amounts of time from a project management perspective.
I'm curious, when you were building the strategic plan, you're going through these different phases of collection of data. At some point, you then need to synthesize it into priorities and then into the plan itself. Like, can you walk me through that process?
Sure. So when we launched the vision in this past January, so January 2025, at that time we're looking at this in terms of horizons. So we're actually planning for 2034, but that's specific to our school. Some people might argue that's a long plan, almost 9 years. And but for us, we're looking at 2034 because we will celebrate 250 years of education at Moses Brown.
I think it actually gives you the opportunity to create like a really big vision
Yeah,
when
it
you have
did.
more of a time horizon,
That's
right?
right. It did. And so then we're
Yeah.
thinking about it in terms of 3 time horizons. So the first 3 years, and then sort of the second 3 years, and then the last 3 years. And the way that we are talking about it is like we have clarity on what we're trying to accomplish in the first 3 years. Very tangible, very specific actions. And then as you get further out, it's less clear. There's a vision, but the action steps are not certain. And the actual tasks that we will do. And so we're acting in a 3-year time frame with our eyes on the horizon of 2034. And every decision we're making now is helping us to get to that point.
Yeah. I would imagine even in that the initial 3 years, there's a lot of iteration that's gonna happen inside of that too.
For sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Well, the acceleration of life certainly makes planning a little more interesting, and change, the acceleration of change in particular. So I think that has been part of the work that we're doing as a community, is how do we develop our comfort with adaptability and flexibility, and that we may have a vision for what something might look like, but we may adapt it,
Yeah.
as we get into that work. And I think even just, in full transparency, it makes it sound like our planning is so well executed at this point. But even today, I was meeting with the members of my senior leadership team, talking about, okay, are we really structuring the work in the most effective way? Because we've got these teams that are meeting and they're responsible for certain parts of the plan, but we're not sure that the right people are at the table all the times. Can we iterate, and even how we're structured to do the work, no less what we're actually trying to implement.
I think that's just the absolute in my mind, it's the absolute right mindset, right? Like, it's really hard to get to perfection.
Mhm.
And so being iterative and recognizing that we're like putting out the best version that we possibly can, knowing that within that we're going to pivot and change, but we're still pointing to that big vision that in 2034 is really important to our community.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, we wanna chase perfection, knowing that we'll never get there. I always say it's like chasing the horizon, like you're constantly chasing the horizon.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
never get there.
I'm curious now that the plan is out there in the world, what are you doing to maintain? I mean, you just gave a little bit of an insight into that, but like, what are you doing to maintain the momentum so that you can get vision into action?
I've got amazing people on the ground, and people seem inspired by it. So, we are actively working on replacing content with a skills framework, and that's happening at every single division. And right now, the faculty are testing those skills within the current and existing curriculum, and then we're also moving beyond the AP in the upper school. So we're developing our advanced seminars around that, and then ultimately each division will culminate in something called the purpose project. So the fourth graders, the eighth graders, and then 11th, 12th graders will be doing meaningful projects that have been intentionally scaffolded through the skill development, that will impact both their own knowledge and understanding of themselves as learners, but also, sort of transactionally for parents, how they present themselves in the college process.
Is that part of your initial 3-year plan?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is by the end of 3 years, this will be in place. Like that's the
Right.
goal that you set. Okay.
That's right. And the ultimate vision, so I don't know how realistic or crazy it is, but is and I w it's an oversimplification, but the students will run the school.
Mm,
So, all of this administrative work and all of these rich conversations that we're having and all of the energy and hours that are spent around the business of school, I want students to have access to and visibility into and the ability to sort of practice
hmm.
life and
Yeah.
work in the context of their school setting. So, for example, we spend an inordinate amount of time and money around producing an alumni magazine. I think that should be students. They should do it start to finish. You've got some students who want to do the writing and the research. Great, you guys go off and do that. The group of students who are going to do the layout and the design, you go ahead and do that. Somebody else has got to get the pictures and the photos. Um, and then it's, them bringing all of that together. That shouldn't be us as adults. It should be a skill that the kids are developing. There are some schools have students on their boards. We should have students on our finance committees so that they're exposed to that understanding and the development of those skills. So there's all sorts of examples of things we can do. But ultimately, 2034, we want the students running the school.
That's such a cool concept. I really like that example of the alumni magazine resonates on a couple of levels. One, I mean, I just what a great opportunity to build those skills, right? Like,
Well, and they get to connect with alumni in a
yeah,
really
that's
intentional way.
yeah, yeah, and that's right. That they get to connect with alumni in a really. I mean, I can just imagine interviewing alums
That's
and
right.
doing all the going to alumni events and doing all the things. Also, like I imagine they're going to bring fresh takes on how you deliver that content through the magazine
For
too,
sure. Oh
which
my
is
god.
which is pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, and I've long believed that our kids should be running our social media accounts as
Oh my God, yeah. For
there's
sure.
a risk, I get it. There's a
Yeah.
risk with that. They're teenagers, but I think the reward would far outweigh. So I'm actually working with 2 seniors right now who are gonna help me launch my head of school Instagram page, and they're gonna be my interns, my intern content managers. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I just think that look, you're right. You can definitely put controls on it and all the things. There's no question about it, but they know what gets views, right? Like they
They
understand
do.
this is their domain
They do.
versus yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious. So it's such a fascinating process that you went through. You arrived on campus, you started a strategic plan as part of being a new member of the community. You brought it internally as a result of like it's really culturally appropriate for your school. And then you started seeing, gosh, there are all these tools that are emerging around us that can help us synthesize in an even better way. So, in many ways, it feels like it was intentional, but also organic at the same time.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
very fortuitous actually, because I did have a moment at the end, sort of December-ish before we were going live with the plan this, almost a year ago now, where I thought, "Now I know why people hire consultants for these
there.
things."
Well, and to be, and I think consultants also bring an outside perspective that is
Yes,
really it's
for
really
sure.
healthy. But within the context of Moses Brown being a Quaker school, I get it. Like I get why doing it internally made a lot of sense for you. So let me ask you this last question.
Yeah.
Um, Imagine one of your peers, another head of school called and said, I just listened to this episode,
Mhm.
super interesting.
Yeah.
We're experimenting with AI in different ways. And I hadn't maybe we hadn't considered using it as part of our strategic planning
Mhm.
process.
Mhm.
I don't even know where to start. Like
Mm.
what would you tell them?
Hmm. Well, I think I'd have a lot of questions, just in terms of what their own use of the tool has been or is, or what the culture is for their school around artificial intelligence. I don't know. I think for us, we were in a high place of trust as a community, because we were still in the honeymoon phase, I think, of a new head of school. And people were excited. They were ready for this
Yeah.
conversation because it was a long time coming. And so that made it a little easier for us to not need that outside consultant, and the great benefit is by not hiring someone, I mean, it just makes strategic planning more sustainable for schools. We can't continue to invest every, 5 or 6 years at the rate that, these things tend to cost, given all of the pressures on, budgets, and the costs of running independent schools today. So I think I'd have a lot of questions for that person, but, if they're open to it and they're interested in it, I think it would be a great conversation in terms of how they might do it that's right for their school and what tools we use that benefited us. And would have a little bit of advice and learning from along the way, but I'd be happy to have those conversations.
Well, that does beg one more question. If somebody wants to reach out, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, email. Yeah, so Titus, Titus at mosesbrown.org.
Perfect. Katie Titus, head of school, Moses Brown School in Providence, Rhode Island. What a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to be here.